Wow, it's so good. I was standing in the back during worship, and it's just amazing to hear the people of God worshiping together and lifting your voices together in praise. And I couldn't even sing. I really couldn't. I was just overwhelmed, and it's really cool to see the work of God in a place. Well, we are here, and my name is Kory, by the way. I'm the lead pastor here at Waite Park Church. I have a lot of visitors here today, and we are glad to have you. We are actually starting, or I guess it's kind of the second of a series that we're doing that we're calling The Struggle is Real, and it's what we call a focus season. It's a time when all of our small groups and everything focuses on the same thing. Because there are sometimes just things that we want to learn together as a congregation, and so we buckle down and we focus on these things, and that's what we're doing. And with that comes these focus booklets. So if you're going to be with us during the whole thing, you can grab one of these out in the Commons area there. You can take notes in here. Of course, there's also notes in your bulletin there. In fact, those are fill-in-the-blank ones. They might be more helpful. And there's also some questions for reflection and all that there too. But I was, yesterday morning, I was eating breakfast, and I got a text message from one of our new attenders named Andrew Berg, and he and his wife Abby, went to California, and so he sent me a text with this picture here, and it was captioned, the struggle is real. And I said, yeah, you look like you're struggling, man. Must be terrible to be you. I don't know if he's watching today or anything, but yeah, I really appreciate that. So thank you very much for that. Anyway, the passage that we read earlier, 1 Corinthians chapter 13, is an amazing passage. One of the great passages of any literature that's ever been written. The truth of it, the poetic nature of it is just amazing. But it's also one that we tend to relegate to weddings, isn't it? That's just about the only time you hear it. We don't do a lot of Bible studies on it and things like that. And I think the reason that we tend to relegate it to weddings is because we live in a society that has tended to elevate romantic love above every other kind of love. And so naturally, when you have a whole chapter that talks about love and describes love, then it's got to be talking about marriage, right? And so we tell 1 Corinthians 13 to stay in your room until we need you, until someone gets married, and then we'll pull you out and we'll read it. But actually, the chapter is not about marriage. It's actually a beautiful poetic statement that reminds us that the distinguishing mark of followers of Jesus is love. It's our ability to love each other. And we might be inclined to say, well, maybe love is just a sideline, or maybe Paul was just feeling particularly lovely that day, and so he wrote that. But actually, we see that all over the pages of Scripture. For instance, and I reference this quite often because I think it's one of the most important passages of Scripture. The time when some religious leaders came to Jesus and asked him, what's the greatest law? What's the most important law in all of the 613 commandments of the Old Testament? And you remember what Jesus said, right? Love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your mind. This is the first and greatest commandment, and the second is like it, love your neighbor as yourself. So he boiled it all down to love for God and love for neighbor. We see it in other places with Jesus. John 13:35, Jesus says to his disciples, it's by this that they will know that you are my disciples, that you love one another, right? We see it all over Paul's writings too. Galatians chapter 5. Paul is confronting people who have bought into the idea that the ritual or focusing on the rules is the most important part of faith. And so he writes to them, he counters that, saying, for in Christ Jesus, neither circumcision nor uncircumcision, and that's just code for following the law, neither of those things has any value. The only thing that counts is faith expressing itself through love. He writes the same thing in Romans chapter 13. Let no debt remain outstanding except the continuing debt to love one another, for whoever loves others has fulfilled the law. Are you starting to see a pattern here? The centerpiece of what we believe, the mark of the believer is love. Love is not beside the point. It's not something good that you should add on to your good theology or your other kinds of service. Okay, it's the centerpiece. It's the goal. That's what Christ wants from us, is for us to love God fully and to love other people. And we know this. We're made to love. I mean, we are designed that way. We are created that way. We have a longing to be loved. And again, our society tends to tell us that sexual love or romantic love is the pinnacle of all kinds of love. But even more important than that, we long for things like acceptance. We want to be seen. We want to be valued. We long for things like friendship. We want to know that we are worthy of other people's time. Okay, that's a longing that we all have. And so hopefully what you see is that the Bible tells us that we are created to love and we long to be loved. And of course, love is something that is intensely relational. Okay, it's hard to do at long distance. Okay, and that's why we long to be connected with people. Even the great philosophers recognize this. For instance, Aristotle wrote, "Man is by nature a social animal whose inclination it is to live in the company of others." Okay, connection with others, it gives us purpose and joy and hope. We cannot live without connection to other people. And that longing to connect is more than just a longing to have friends. Okay, it's the expression of a deeper need that we have to be known and to make a difference in the lives of other people. Now, here's the problem, is that this isn't the kind of life that many people live. We long for love, we want to be able to love people well, and yet there are so many people who are unable to do it or don't live that kind of life. In fact, this is one of the biggest struggles that we have in our society today. I've even had numerous conversations with people in the church over the years who talk about how hard it is to connect, not just with friends outside the church, but even with people inside the church. You know, I've had interesting conversations with people from other cultures who move here, and they say, wow, it's just different here. In fact, I remember a conversation with Balkiza Bangura from Sierra Leone, and she made this statement that was really insightful, and it stuck with me. She probably said it, 3 or 4 years ago. But she said this. She said, "In my country, we are materially poor but relationally rich. Here, we are materially rich but relationally poor." And I think that's a great description of our society today. Many people say that we are currently experiencing a loneliness epidemic in the Western world. One study from the U.S. found that 40% of Americans say that they sometimes or always feel like their social relationships aren't meaningful. 20% of people say that they feel isolated and lonely. And the problem is especially high among seniors today. In England, the problem is so big that in 2017, the government actually appointed a minister of loneliness. Okay, think about that. To address that issue. And when you look at our world today, when we look at our society today, you can see, maybe that's something we need as well. So we are created to connect. We long to connect, but we live in a society. And maybe you found this. We live in a society that makes connection really, really difficult. Well, in order to get to the solution, we need to try to figure out what is at the root of the problem. Now, it's not a simple task because I don't think that there's just one cause. I think there's a whole number of different factors that play in, and there are personal barriers and there are social barriers, and I just want to run through them real quickly because I want to get to the solution, which I think is simple maybe, but not easy. But let's go and let's take a look and see maybe what the root of this loneliness or this difficulty connecting is. Now, like I said, there are some personal barriers, there are some societal barriers, so let's talk about personal ones first. Now, there are some people, and actually an increasing number of people who experience something called social anxiety. And there are many different causes for social anxiety. Some of it might be genetic. Some of it is the result of trauma in your background, abuse or sexual abuse or whatever, that makes it really, really uncomfortable to be around people. And so it seems like we have an increasing number of people who have this kind of social anxiety, and so that makes it hard for people to connect. On top of that, we have, for many people, the season of life that they're in is something that makes it really hard to connect. I can remember when my wife and I moved to Kentucky to go to seminary. We moved into married student housing. We had been married for a month, and we moved down there. And we moved into married student housing, which is basically a glorified or maybe a horrified dorm. And the cool thing about it was that we had a ton of other couples, in the apartments next and across the way and all of that, who were in the same boat as we were, and we saw them multiple times a day, and we would hang out at night, and we had so much in common, and the proximity was something that allowed us to be able to connect. And that's something that you see, also in college, and there are a lot of people who go through college and they get used to that kind of communal life where everyone is together and you see your friends multiple times a day, and then you get out into the working world, and you realize that that's not what life is going to be like. You get out into the working world, and you might have best friends, but you might only see them every couple of weeks or so. And so there are seasons of life where it's easier to connect and seasons of life where it's harder to connect. And then add on top of that family life. If you have kids, especially if you have young kids, then you know that limits the number of opportunities that you have to be able to get out and to be with people outside of your family. Although, if you're single, if you're unmarried, then that creates its own set of issues, because if you're married or if you have kids and that at home, then you have a sort of community built in, and at least you have that. If you're single, then you have to work twice as hard then to get out, because you need to make sure that you're being active in getting out and meeting new people and getting together with your friends. And there are just seasons of life that are easier for it to connect than others. Or you might be in a season where you're working second shift, or you're working inconsistent hours at work. That makes it really difficult. If all your other friends are working 9 to 5 and you're working second shift, it might be really hard for you to be able to see them, okay? And so those are some of the personal things that happen, and maybe you have some of your own that don't allow you to be able to connect like you should. But on top of these personal factors, there are also some societal factors that make it really difficult for us to connect. So here, let me list a few of them here. The first one is that we live in a society that has an individualistic mindset. Individualism it means to think about the person as an autonomous, independent self rather than part of a group, like a family, a neighborhood, workplace, church, or city. There was a time when people primarily thought of themselves as a family member or as a citizen. Today, we think of ourselves as individuals above everything else. And to see this in play in our society, just look at the people that we tend to celebrate. In the past, we used to celebrate the person. We used to consider heroes the one who sacrificed their dreams or their safety or even their life for the sake of the group. And to some degree, we still do this, really only with military people. Okay, we do. I think our society does a pretty good job of celebrating people who are willing to give their life for the country. But more and more often, when you see in TV or you see in movies, what we celebrate now is the person who breaks the shackles of community, breaks the shackles of expectations to achieve her dreams, and to live free from the constraints of other people in society. And while there might be some good things about this, I think thinking about people individually has produced some good things as well. But I think we have to realize that this kind of rugged individualism, or this emphasis on individualism, also comes at the expense of community belonging, oftentimes. We also see this in our overcommitment, in our busyness. We in our society, we value achievement and activity. When you ask someone how they're doing, most often their answer is what? Busy, right? How are you doing? Oh, you're fine, right? But oftentimes they'll say, I'm just so busy. And why do we do that? Well, we do that because we wear busyness as a badge of honor. Because we think, well, if I was honest about the other option, well, actually, I've been, sitting at home watching Netflix most nights, but because I don't really have anything else to do, then they would look at us funny. They'd say, well, what is wrong with you? I mean, aren't you an achiever? Don't you have things to do? But we try to wear that as a badge, busyness and overachieving. and many of the things that we overcommit to are activities that are just misplaced priorities, or at least they're out of order in our lives. Of course, all of us need money to live, and so we have to work, but the materialistic side of our society tempts us to sacrifice connection for the sake of money. And so we become workaholics, and we make work a bigger priority in our lives than it should be. And that dedication to work means long hours that keeps us from connecting with our friends or our family or from the people around us. Okay, so those are some of the other societal things. And there's another one that I think is a big one that we've talked about before, but I'm not sure that we can emphasize enough. And it's things like social media and streaming and our phones and all of that. Those are huge societal disconnectors. Now this one is tricky because media, social media, our phones, promises, and in some way it delivers on these promises, allows us to be more connected. Okay, you can stay in touch with old friends or people across long distances. You can stay in touch with people that you don't even know. I was thinking about, one of the good things about it is the other day I was at home and I got an email, a notification from this app or program called Nextdoor. Anybody else do Nextdoor, the social media thing? Yeah, it's actually pretty handy because it's only people that are in your neighborhood. And so I saw on this that there was a single gal that lived down by the post office that said, hey, it was on the day that was really cold, said, my car won't start and I've got somewhere I need to be. Is there anyone out there that can help me? And I was like, well, I'm on my lunch break, so I'll just swing down there. And so I just messaged her back and said, all right, I'll do it. And I went and I jumped her car and went home. And that was all because of social media. She didn't have anyone else in the area, and so it allowed her to be able to connect with someone who was willing to come and help. And you see that kind of thing all the time. People are willing to get out and help other people in response to some of these apps. And so there are some good things. It allows you to find people with common interests. I mean, how many of you have started a dating relationship on a dating app? Okay, a few of you? All right. Now, I mean, it's something that actually works, And when you look at the statistics, what you'll find is that people who meet online or on dating apps have just as high a success rate in marriages than people who meet other ways. And so it's something that's a good thing. But we're also finding out that many of these technologies were created specifically to be addictive. Companies that make them. Is this not? Oh, it shut off. It's back on now? Okay. There are many people who started creating them, whether it's Facebook or Instagram or some of the others, that created them, that are now stepping away and saying, you know what, we knew that they were addictive, but we knew that addiction is a good business model. In the same way that the cigarette companies knew that nicotine was addictive, knew that they could get you hooked. It's a great business model. You make a lot of money getting people hooked on things. And they said, we knew it, and we continued to do it. And so what you see is that the addictive power of these things keeps us plastered to our phones, scrolling through endless streams Facebook-wise, and it extends itself to games. I don't know if you guys play games on your phone or whatever, but games today are different than what they used to be. In games today, there are always another level. You can power up your kingdom or power up your character or whatever, and it's just a never-ending thing where I can just achieve a little bit more and go a little bit further, and it just never ends because you're always looking for that next upgrade, that next level up. It's hard to quit, okay? There's always another level. Now, these technologies are things that keep our minds occupied with hits of dopamine, and they can keep us from in the flesh, person-to-person connection that our soul longs for. And in fact, even some of the good things about them, the fact that you can connect with people over long distances, also tend to make us less likely to connect with people who are close to us as well. And so there are a lot of pitfalls to these sort of things that keep us from connecting with other people. And in fact, it rewires. Studies are showing that it's starting to rewire our brains in a way that has a negative impact on our relationships and on our mental health. And so, a lot of things in our society that work to disconnect us. And the issue is that we fall right into it. I'm not sure how much different social media use for Christians are for anyone else. And so the question is what is the solution? Okay, how do we do a better job of connecting? Well, I actually believe that one of the solutions is found right here in the church. You see, Jesus did not create individual disciples only. He created a church. He created a body. He created a family. He created a group of people that are specifically designed for connecting with God and connecting with other people. Okay, but the church can only be the solution to this if we're willing to live differently, if we're willing to reject the disconnecting ways of our society and learn to live in connecting ways, the way Jesus did. His ministry was a ministry of reconciliation, to reconcile people to God by forgiving their sins, but then also reconciling us to each other as well. And so when we learn to love people as Jesus loved them, then our life becomes oriented toward other people rather than our own comfort or our achievement or our entertainment. And the way that we learn to love people the way Jesus did is not just through education, but it's through formation. Okay, now let me explain the difference here. What I want to do here with you today is I want to educate you. Okay, I want to put information in your head that hopefully you will remember. All right? I'm going to remind you of some things. I'm going to hopefully teach you some new things. I want you to learn some things in your head. But hear me here. The more important thing today is what happens when you leave here. Okay, because all of the education in the world will not change anything if you don't allow it to form you. Okay, you have to do it. You have to, the changes that you make, the habits that you take on, those are the things that will form you into a different kind of person. Okay? Now, as we talk about the struggle to connect today, we're going to offer a solution that comes from a very old Christian practice called a rule of life. Okay, how many of you have heard of a rule of life before? Okay, most of you should because we've talked about this when we did the soul training, but that was a few years ago, so you might have forgotten. But I'm going to remind you, okay? A rule of life is simply an intentional set of rules that govern how you spend your time that will shape the kind of person you become. All right? Now think about it, okay? A rule of life is simply an intentional set of rules that govern how you spend your time that shapes the kind of person you become. The author Annie Dillard wrote this. She said, "How we spend our days is, of course, how we spend our lives. What we do with this hour and that one is what we are doing." So she says, a schedule defends from chaos and whim. It is a net for catching days. It's a scaffolding on which a worker can stand and labor with both hands at sections of time. Okay, do you see what she's saying there? When we create a schedule and we're intentional about how we spend our time, it keeps us from the chaotic life and the disconnecting ways of our society. Another author named Justin Early writes this. He says, "Only when your habits are constructed to match your worldview do you become someone who doesn't just know about God and neighbor, but someone who actually loves God and neighbor." Okay? So do you see what we're doing here? Okay? If we don't intentionally structure our lives to be what we want them to be or what God wants them to be, then our lives will be unintentionally shaped by the world around us. And if the world around us is very good at creating disconnection, then we will also live disconnected lives. It's making us very good, it's very good at making people who are self-focused and people who love themselves more than they love God or other people. Well, if you struggle to connect with people or you often find yourself feeling lonely, then I want you to make sure that this week, actually, I would like for everyone to make sure that you take the time this week and to go through some of the things that we've talked about and put together a plan of action. Okay, maybe you're someone who doesn't fall prey to any of these things. Maybe you're good, at all of these areas and you're good at connecting. If so, I want you to call me and I want to learn from you because it's a difficult thing. But I would like for you to either work through them alone or actually they're designed for you to work through them in community. And so if you're a part of a small group or if you're a part of a connect group, one of them meets right after church here, so you can stick around for that. I want you guys to work through many of these practices that we're going to talk about, and maybe as a group develop this rule of life that you'll do together, that you'll hold each other accountable to, and do that as a community. And we as a church, we want to be a place of connection for a disconnected world. I actually believe that that's one of the greatest tools that we have to reach our neighborhood, to reach our world, is connecting. But in order to do that, we have to be able to live differently. 1 John chapter 3 tells us, "Let us love not in word and speech, but in action and in truth." Okay, in other words, our love should be active. It should be something that makes a difference in our lives. And so, here's what I'm going to encourage you to do. It's going to be really simple. I want you to make sure you have your notes out and take notes, and you can, just do some part of these 5 things, or you can come up with creative ideas of your own. But I'm going to encourage you to do this in groups. Because we're not just telling you how you can connect individually, but we're talking about how do we become a church that doesn't give in to the habits of disconnection. How do we become a church that will readily connect people? Okay, so let's talk about a rule of life. I'm going to give you some ideas to get you started, and that's all these are. They're just ideas. They're not intended to be legalistic. They're not intended to tell you need to do these things. If you don't love Jesus. I'm not going to tell you any of that kind of stuff, but I want to start to get your gears turning to say, all right, so what are some of the habits? What are the intentional things that I can put into place in my life that will allow me to be able to connect with people better for my own benefit, but also for the benefit of being able to love other people? So let me start with this one, okay? Say the Jesus Creed 3 times daily. Okay, now I don't know that this is a common vernacular, but we looked earlier on in the message at the passage where Jesus was answering, what's the most important part of the law? Well, what he quotes there, part of it is what's called the Shema. And that's from the Old Testament. Hear, O Israel, hear the Lord our God, the Lord is one. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, and strength. And love your neighbor as yourself is not in there. Okay, but you'll see, and it's in Deuteronomy chapter 6, where he says, write it on your doorpost, wear it around your neck, teach it to your children. Just over and over and over it says, make sure that this command stays in your mind, not on the back of your mind, but in the front of your mind. Okay, and so here's what we're going to do is when you get home, you can write this on a card, type it up, whatever, laminate it, put it in a picture frame or something like that, but put it in a place that's prominent in your house. Put it on the ceiling above your bed, so when you wake up, it's the first thing you see. Or maybe it's a card by your alarm clock, or maybe it's taped to the mirror in your bathroom as you're getting ready. Okay, but 3 times a day, I want you to say it. In fact, just say it out loud. Let's practice here. I think we've got it up on the screen here, don't we? Okay, all right. So let's say it out loud. I know some of you may have it memorized, but I guess to make sure we all have the same wording, let's say it together. Okay, ready? Love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your mind. This is the first and greatest commandment, and the second is like it. Love your neighbor as yourself. All the law and the prophets hang on these 2 commandments. Now, hopefully, after you've done this enough, you're going to be able to memorize it. But I want you to commit this to memory, because really, this is the goal. Okay, this is the purpose. When we're talking about the ethical life of believers, the mark of the believer, this is it. And so, if you remind yourself of it regularly, okay, then that should start to shape what you do, or you should start to think a little differently about what you do. The most important thing. So put it in a place that is prominent, that you will see it, and do it regular, and even say it out loud even, because sometimes saying things out loud makes it more real than if we just think it to ourselves. So that's one of them, okay? Another one, here's another idea. Bless 3 people this week. Bless 3 people this week. Proverbs 11:25 says, "The one who blesses others is abundantly blessed. Those who help others are helped." And this can happen in a number of different ways. It could be words of encouragement, a note, text. I hate to say it, texting, because that's on your phone, right? But you can do that because people have their phones and that. Email, phone call, on someone's Facebook wall. I don't know. I wouldn't make it like a public thing. Make it a personal thing, right? I mean, I always think when it's my birthday, of course. And I have a Facebook account. I don't really go on it very much. But when it's my birthday, I always know that I'm going to have 150 people saying, "Hey, happy birthday." It means so much more when someone takes the time to call me or text me or send me expensive gifts. Of course, that's... No, it just means more when there's that personal touch there, and so find a way to encourage people. One of the I was talking to my wife. We used to do this thing in service, and I think we're going to reinstitute it. Encouragement cards, where we take time in the service to write out a card of encouragement to someone, and we'll send it for you and all of that. So I think next week, Holly, where are you? I know you're not working today, so I'm not going to talk to you about this. So anyway. We're gonna try to do that to encourage one another, but try to do that to 3 people, and it could be words of encouragement. It could be acts of kindness and service, and it doesn't even have to be just for people, but it could be with them. If you see your neighbor out shoveling snow, put on your boots and go out there and help them shovel snow, because not only is it something kind for you to do to them, but it's also something to do with them. It adds to the connection if you do that. And there are all kinds of things you could do that. And of course there are gifts. This is something that I want to improve in this area. Not just gifts, but just encouragement overall. Holly has been working in the office, and she is so thoughtful, with things, gifts and cards and all of that kind of stuff. And every time I receive something, I'm like, oh my goodness, that is so awesome. I just feel so loved, and yet, it's not something that I practice as much as I ought to. But, you guys know when you receive an act of kindness or a word of kindness out of the blue, you know how it makes you feel, right? Okay, you have the opportunity to make other people feel that way too, to feel connected and to feel loved. And so just in a very practical way, any of those things, and maybe you've got some better ideas yourself. What is this, the third one? Third one. Eat with 3 people outside of your family. Okay, if you have 3 people in your family, that doesn't count as 3. All right, in fact, that doesn't count as your family doesn't count in this one. Connect and eat with 3 people outside your family. Now, eating with someone is something that biblically speaking, and I guess there was some of it was a cultural thing, was a very, very important part of what it meant to be a part of the body. And so that's why we see, when Acts chapter 2 is giving a description of how the early church lived, it says things like they devoted themselves to the apostles' teaching and to fellowship, to the breaking of bread, and to prayer. Now, some people say that means communion. I'm not so sure. I think it actually means that they ate together a lot. When you share a meal, you share something. You have to sit down and take the time and all of that. And so I would encourage you to do that. Now, I know that there are some of you who are saying, man, 3 people in a week? That is a ton of people. That is a lot of work to try to sit down with 3 people. The only reason we think that is because we have been conditioned by our world to be busy, to have other things to do, and really, 3 people in a week shouldn't be that hard. You can make it whatever you want. If you want to make it 1, that's fine. Okay. The other thing you could do is if you want to connect with 3 people, connect with them all at the same time. You make the invite. I know there are a lot of people who will, sit around and go, man, nobody ever invites me over and all of that. Go ahead and make the invite. invite a group of people. A couple of weeks ago, 2 Sundays ago, I think, maybe it was just last Sunday. I don't know. We had a group. I started making pizza a couple of years ago, and I love to do it just as because there's sort of a craft to it, and I'm getting better at it, and I like to experiment on people, and so I just invite people over and just say, hey, I want to make some pizzas, and I make like 6 or 7 pizzas, and they all have to be made one at a time. And so on Sunday night, we had a group of like 10 or 12 people over, and we were just all sitting around this table. We have a big dining room table, sitting around the table and chatting, and it takes probably an hour and a half for all of those pizzas just to get made. And so there's a lot of downtime in between, and just great conversation, so much fun. It was just a blast. And you can do things like that too. And I know that there are some of you who will say, well, yeah, but then I got to clean my house and I have to go to so much work and all of that. But you know something? Hospitality does not mean a spotless house. All right? If they're your family, if they're your friends, then don't worry about clean up a little bit. Don't leave dirty socks on the dining room table or anything like that. But you don't have to make it this big production. Invite them over for grilled cheese, whatever. But really the point is not to impress people with how great of a housemaker you are or how great of a cook you are or whatever. But it's just to be together. And eating together is a great way to do that. Fourth, limit your media use. In fact, I think I said be intentional about your media use. Now, I'm not going to say that you should get off all social media and you should just cut it all off and not have a smartphone and things like that. Maybe for some of you that's what you need because the temptation is too hard. But you at least have to be intentional about how you use it. And so you can make rules for yourself, like you can limit the amount that you consume media in a given day. Okay. It's really common and really easy just to put on Netflix, and it does this autoplay thing, and so you can put Parks and Rec on and just watch it over and over and over, episodes that you've watched 5 times. This is what happens in our house. Okay, that's unintentional use of media. If there's a show that you like and you want to watch it, then sit down and watch that, but then turn it off. Okay? If there's a game that you want to watch, but you don't have to watch the doubleheader, because all of these things are things that limit the amount of time that we have to be able to connect with other people. How about this one? Turn your phone off for an hour a day. Okay? How many of you, first of all, how many of you never turn your phone off? All right, quite a few. All right. How many of you, if you do turn your phone off, or if your phone is away from you, you feel all alone? Anyone? Okay, nobody's going to admit it. Because what you think is when you turn your phone off is what if there's an emergency? What if someone is trying to get a hold of me? What if I get a text in the meantime and it's an urgent thing? People used to not always have their phone with them, and we were fine, right? We survived, right? But use that time then to be able to do something, read, okay? Be with someone else. Have a conversation with them without having to always worry about whether this notification is going off or that sort of thing. Just be intentional about it, and don't use media to fend off boredom, okay? And when you think about it, when you use media to fend off boredom, you're bored anyway, right? It's not helping. It's just doing something to occupy your mind, okay? So find something more productive to occupy your mind. Okay, don't use it to fend off boredom. I'm not saying get rid of it completely, but what I'm saying is just be intentional about how you use it. Okay, when you have some downtime somewhere, don't just automatically pick up your phone and start scrolling through. Think. Okay, just explore the thoughts in your head or something. Talk to someone, whatever. And I'm not shaming you for that, because that's me too. Okay. Finally, faithfully gather with other believers. Faithfully gather with other believers. Hebrews 10:24-25 says, "And let us consider how we may spur one another on toward love and good deeds, not giving up meeting together as some are in the habit of doing." Okay, so some of that is here, worship service. It could be small group. It could be social opportunities that we have. I think this coming Friday, we have a game night coming up. Even if you don't like board games, just come and hang out. Everybody likes eating, so come and eat some of the snacks that are there. But just be together with other believers. Take the time. There are lots of different spaces. Joseph Myers has a book called The Search to Belong, and he talks about 4 different spaces. He talks about public space, which would be like what we're doing here. We're all kind of sitting in a room but focused on something that's a larger group. You can't really connect with each other. There's social space, and that's a little bit closer where you get to know a little bit about people. There's personal space, and that would be like a small group or something where you share a little bit more and people know more intimate details about it. And then there's intimate space. And we all have different needs when it comes to all of these spaces. Usually we all need something in each one. Okay, but there are some people who really don't need a lot of really intimate time. They can get by with personal time and social time and public time, And so, not everyone is going to have the same needs for that kind of thing as you do, but just kind of understand what you need, okay? What do I need? Do I need just to be in public with people? Do I need to have social time? Do I need to get together with a trusted friend and talk about deep things? And so just keep those things in mind. But the goal is for us to meet together, to share life together as a church. And again, this is not just for our own individual edification, although it will be for that, but it's also to create us into the kind of community that we can invite a disconnected world in to be able to connect, not just with us, but to be able to connect with God. Okay, so those are just some suggestions, and you can work them up however you want. Maybe you've got some better ideas, and that's fine. If you do, feel free to share them with me or share them with your small group. I'd love to hear them. This may seem like a lot of work, okay? It may seem like, wow, I just have, I would rather just go home and veg all day. It's just so much easier to do it that way. And you might wonder, well, why in the world should I put so much time into doing something like this, into changing a life that, quite frankly, just seems to be kind of working for me right now? Well, here's the reason. Is when you get to the end of your life, you're not going to be thinking about, oh, I just wish that I would have finished that episode of Breaking Bad. Okay? You're not going to be thinking about how you'd seen that one more clever tweet about how Donald Trump is a terrible guy, right? Okay, you're not going to be thinking about things like that. You're not going to be thinking about, oh, I could have been more outraged on social media. None of that kind of stuff. But what inevitably will come into your mind was how are my relationships? What difference did I make in other people's lives? Okay, because those are the things that make your life rich. And oftentimes, we don't think about that until we get to the end of life and we look back with regret. And what I'm asking you to do right now is to say, what do I want my life to look like when I'm looking back on it? And to live that way right now. To start to structure your life around relationship so that what you do, what's first in your life, is what should be the most important thing. It's a very practical thing, but it's also a very hard thing because you have to be intentional. You have to be on top of it. You have to have some accountability in your life. But I will tell you that it gets easier over time. I think many of us, just like being out of shape physically, I think we can get out of shape relationally as well. And so take the time to get in shape. And if you start to center your life on that, when you start to work on your ability to be able to connect with people more, it'll be fulfilling for you, and you'll be able to have a greater impact on the people around you. Let's pray. God, thanks for this word today. And Lord, even though, I don't know, maybe this stuff is not incredibly inspirational, it's just very practical, very normal, the normal stuff of life. God, when we hear about it, when we read about it, we realize this is so important. And the truth is that there are many people who long for this. There are many people who really long to connect with other people, and they haven't really been able to do that for a long time in their lives. And there's this sort of, emptiness that they feel, or a loneliness that they feel that's so common in our world today. So God, I want to take the time to pray for our church and pray that we will be willing to be different. I pray that this community would be a refuge for people who are disconnected, a refuge for people who are lonely, a refuge for people who have no friends, a refuge for people who have this hole and they don't realize it, that what they're missing is connection with you and connection with others. And so, Lord, I pray that we would practice this stuff, that we would practice hard, and that as we do that you would form us into people who are able to love you more and to love our neighbors. We pray this in Jesus' name. Amen.
Please stand with us.